I woke up to the sound of my garage door motor grinding against something at 3 in the morning during what had to be the worst ice storm Texas had seen in decades. My security system's phone notification showed motion in the garage, and I sat up fast, my FBI training kicking in even after 5 years of retirement. Through the camera feed, I could see a figure in a bright pink parka wrestling with my industrial generator, the one I'd specifically bought and installed after the 2021 winter disaster that had killed hundreds of people across the state. My name is Patrick Fordham, and I'd spent 28 years with the FBI before retiring to this quiet neighborhood in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin. I'd bought the house in Oak Valley Estates 3 years ago, thinking the homeowner association would be a minor annoyance at worst. I was about to discover just how wrong I could be. I pulled on my jeans and grabbed my phone, watching as the woman in my garage tried to disconnect the generator from its mounting bracket. She had bolt cutters, which explained how she'd gotten through the padlock on my side garage door. The power had gone out around 11 the previous night, and I'd fired up the generator to keep my heat running and my food from spoiling. Apparently, someone had noticed. I grabbed my concealed carry piece from the nightstand, more out of habit than necessity, and headed downstairs. The house was warm, humming along nicely with the generator doing its job outside. Through the interior garage door window, I could see her more clearly now. Middle-aged, blonde hair in that specific Karen cut that screamed entitlement, and she was now trying to physically drag my 300-pound generator toward the open garage door. I flipped on the garage lights and opened the door. "That's private property you're stealing." She jumped about a foot in the air and spun around, clutching her chest dramatically. "Oh my God, you scared me half to death." "Good. Now step away from my generator and explain why you broke into my garage at 3 in the morning. Her shock quickly morphed into indignation, which would have been impressive if she wasn't literally caught red-handed in the middle of committing a felony. "I'm Wendy Bradshaw, the president of the Oak Valley Estates HOA, and I'm not stealing anything. I'm confiscating this generator for community use during this emergency." I let that sink in for a moment. "You're confiscating my personal property. Do you have a warrant, a court order, any legal authority whatsoever?" The HOA bylaws clearly state that during a community emergency, the board can requisition necessary resources for the common good. Your generator is needed at the clubhouse to keep the pipes from freezing and to provide a warming center for the neighborhood. I walked further into the garage, and she actually had the audacity to stand her ground between me and my generator. "Madam, I don't care what your HOA bylaws say. You can't just break into someone's garage and steal their property. That's called burglary, and in Texas, I'd be well within my rights to defend my property with force." She puffed up like an angry chicken. "Are you threatening me? I'll have you know that I've been the HOA president for 6 years, and nobody talks to me like that. This is a community emergency, and you're being selfish by keeping this generator for yourself when there are elderly people who need heat. Then they should call the fire department or go to one of the city emergency shelters. They shouldn't rely on their HOA president to commit breaking and entering on their behalf." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "The police won't come. They're overwhelmed with the ice storm. Every road is a skating rink and they're dealing with real emergencies." She crossed her arms, clearly thinking she'd won some kind of point. "We'll see about that." I dialed 911, and while I waited for the dispatcher, Wendy actually tried to go back to disconnecting my generator. I stepped between her and the equipment. The dispatcher answered, and I could hear the chaos in the background. 911, what's your emergency?" This is Patrick Fordham at 2847 Oak Ridge Court in Oak Valley Estates. I have an intruder in my garage attempting to steal my generator. The suspect is still on the premises." Wendy huffed loudly. "I'm not an intruder. I'm the HOA president." The dispatcher asked me to repeat the address, and I could hear her typing. "Sir, I'm showing that address is in Round Rock. I need to transfer you to the Williamson County Sheriff's Office. Please hold." After another minute, I got through to a deputy who sounded exhausted. I explained the situation again while Wendy stood there tapping her foot like I was the one being unreasonable. "Sir, we're experiencing an extreme call volume tonight. Is the intruder armed or violent?" "Not armed, but she's refusing to leave and has already used bolt cutters to break into my garage. She's actively attempting to steal a $3,000 generator." The deputy sighed. "Can you secure the property and get somewhere safe?" "We'll send a unit when one becomes available, but I'm being honest with you, it could be several hours." "I understand. I'm a retired FBI agent. I can handle the situation until you arrive." That changed the deputy's tone immediately. "Retired bureau. Okay, sir. Keep yourself safe, and we'll get someone there as soon as possible. Do not engage physically unless you're in immediate danger." "Understood." I hung up and looked at Wendy, who was now eyeing my generator like she was calculating whether she could make a run for it with the equipment. "Police are on their way. You should leave now before this gets worse for you." I heard what he said. "They're not coming for hours. By then, I'll have this generator set up at the clubhouse where it belongs. The HOA will reimburse you for its use." I had to admire the sheer audacity, even as I marveled at the stupidity. "Madam, you're committing multiple felonies right now. Breaking and entering, attempted theft, criminal mischief for destroying my padlock. In Texas, these are serious crimes." "Oh, please, you're being dramatic." "It's just a generator. A $3,000 generator that you're trying to steal. That makes it a state jail felony in Texas, punishable by up to 2 years in prison and a $10,000 fine." She waved her hand dismissively. "Nobody's going to prison over a generator during an ice storm. Stop being ridiculous and help me get this thing into my SUV. It's for the good of the community." I dealt with a lot of criminals in my career. Mobsters, terrorists, corrupt politicians, serial killers. But something about HOA Karens hit different. They had this unshakable belief that their tiny kingdom gave them absolute authority, and consequences were for other people. I'm going to say this one more time. Leave my garage now, or I'll place you under citizen's arrest until the police arrive." Wendy laughed. "Citizen's arrest? What is this, the Wild West? You can't just arrest people." "Actually, in Texas, I can. Section 14.01 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure allows any person to arrest another who commits an offense in their presence. And you, Mrs. Bradshaw, are actively committing multiple offenses in my presence." She must have seen something in my expression that finally convinced her I wasn't bluffing. "Fine, I'll leave. But this isn't over. The HOA board will be discussing your complete lack of community spirit at our next meeting, and I guarantee there will be consequences. Looking forward to it. Now go." She started toward the door she'd broken through, then turned back. "You know, Patrick, people like you are what's wrong with this neighborhood. Everyone else understands that we're supposed to work together, support each other, follow the rules. But you think you're special just because you worked for the government. Mrs. Bradshaw, you literally broke into my garage to steal my property. Please don't lecture me about following rules." She made a sound somewhere between a growl and a shriek, then stormed out into the ice storm. I watched through the camera as she slipped twice, getting to her massive Escalade, nearly face planting both times. Normally, I might have felt bad, but my sympathy well had run pretty dry. I checked the damage. She'd completely destroyed the padlock on the side door, and the bolt cutters she'd left behind were expensive professional-grade tools. I took photos of everything, documented the scene like I'd been trained, and sent the images to myself. Then I grabbed a spare padlock from my workbench and secured the door again. The generator hummed along outside, completely oblivious to all the drama it had caused. I reset my security system and went back inside, but sleep wasn't happening. I made coffee and settled in to wait for the police, knowing it could be dawn before they showed up given the weather conditions. Around 5:30, as the sky was just starting to lighten, my doorbell camera showed Wendy returning. This time she had two other people with her, a man and another woman, both bundled up against the cold. I pulled up the audio feed. "I'm telling you, he was completely unreasonable," Wendy was saying. "Threatened me, refused to help the community, acted like a total tyrant." The man, who looked to be in his 60s, rang my doorbell. I let them wait a moment before answering through the intercom. "Can I help you, Mr. Fordham? I'm Gregory Hutchins, HOA Vice President. I'm here with Wendy and Susan Mitchell, our treasurer. We'd like to discuss a compromise regarding your generator." "There's nothing to discuss. Mrs. Bradshaw committed several crimes tonight, and I'm waiting for the police to arrive. I suggest you all leave before I add trespassing to the charges." Susan stepped forward. "Mr. Fordham, please. We have 17 elderly residents without power. The clubhouse has a full kitchen and space for people to warm up, but without electricity, it's useless. We're just asking to borrow your generator for a few days until power is restored. Then ask. Don't break into my garage at 3 in the morning like a thief." Wendy jumped in. "I already explained this. The HOA bylaws give us the authority to requisition community resources during emergencies." I opened the front door, staying in the doorway where I could control the space. The cold air hit me hard, and I could see their breath fogging in front of them. "Show me." "Excuse me." "Show me where in the HOA bylaws it gives you the authority to break into my garage and steal my property. I've read our CC and Articles and bylaws cover to cover. There's nothing in there about requisitioning private property." Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "It's under the emergency powers section. Subsection F, paragraph 3, I said, because I actually had memorized the relevant sections after buying the house. It says the HOA board may implement emergency restrictions on water usage, pool access, and common area facilities. It says nothing about entering private property or confiscating personal belongings." The three of them exchanged looks. Wendy's face was turning red. "You're splitting hairs. The spirit of the rule clearly gives us authority to act for the community's benefit during emergencies. The spirit of the rule isn't a legal concept. If you wanted emergency powers to confiscate property, you should have had the homeowners vote on an amendment. But you didn't, because it's insane and would never pass. So you're just going to let people freeze while you sit in your warm house with your precious generator." Susan's voice had an edge to it now. "No, I'm going to suggest they do what people all over Texas are doing right now. Go to emergency shelters, stay with family or friends who have power, call the non-emergency line for welfare checks on vulnerable residents. What I'm not going to do is reward attempted theft by handing over my generator. The HOA will rent it from you," Gregory offered. $200 per day, that's more than fair. "I don't want your money, I want you to leave my property and never break into my garage again. Is that clear enough?" Wendy's face had gone from red to purple. "You know what? Fine, keep your stupid generator. But don't think you can just ignore the HOA. We have rules in this community, and you're going to follow them or pay the consequences." Is that a threat? It's a promise. You're behind on your fence stain renewal. Your grass was a quarter-inch too tall in October. You parked your truck in the driveway overnight on 3 separate occasions last month. I've been keeping track, and the fines are going to add up real fast. I smiled, which seemed to unsettle her. I'm sure they will. Now get off my porch. They left, and I watched them huddle in Wendy's Escalade for about 5 minutes, clearly having some kind of heated discussion. When they finally drove off, I noticed they headed toward the clubhouse at the front of the neighborhood. The police finally showed up around 7:30. A Williamson County deputy sheriff who looked like he hadn't slept in 24 hours carefully made his way up my icy driveway. I had fresh coffee waiting. "Mr. Fordham, I'm Deputy Carson. Sorry for the delay. It's been a hell of a night." "No problem. Come in and warm up." He gratefully accepted the coffee and listened as I walked him through everything that had happened. I showed him the security footage, the photos of the damaged lock, and Wendy's bolt cutters that I'd kept as evidence. "And she actually claimed the HOA gave her the right to take your generator." He was shaking his head in disbelief. "That's what she said. I've got it all on audio from my security system." "Okay, so this is pretty clear-cut burglary of a habitation. Since she entered an attached garage, that's a second-degree felony in Texas." He was taking notes. "Do you want to press charges?" "I do. And I want to make sure this is documented thoroughly because I have a feeling Mrs. Bradshaw isn't going to let this go." "Your gut feeling usually right. FBI agents have good instincts. 28 years with the Bureau taught me that people who think they are above the law tend to escalate rather than back down." Deputy Carson nodded. "I'll need to speak with Mrs. Bradshaw and get her statement. Do you have her address?" I pulled up the HOA directory on my phone and gave him Wendy's information. She lived on Maple Ridge Drive, about 6 streets over. Big house, probably 5,000 square feet, with elaborate Christmas decorations that had earned her a front-page photo in the local newsletter. After the deputy left, I finally tried to get some sleep, but the adrenaline was still pumping. Instead, I started going through my own files on the HOA. I'd been keeping records since month 1. When I'd received my first violation notice for having a wreath on my door that was supposedly the wrong shade of red. Over the past 3 years, I'd received 47 violation notices from the HOA. Some were legitimate, like the time my lawn service missed a week and my grass got too long. But most were petty nonsense. Wrong color welcome mat. Garden hose visible from the street. Newspaper left in the driveway past noon on a Sunday. Each one came with a $50 fine that escalated if not paid within 30 days. I'd paid them all, not wanting the hassle of fighting it, but I documented everything. Photos with timestamps, copies of all correspondence, records of every interaction with the HOA board. Old habits die hard, and building a case file was second nature after 3 decades in law enforcement. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered it anyway. "Mr. Fordham, this is Linda Chen. I'm the attorney representing Oak Valley Estates Homeowner Association. I'm calling regarding the unfortunate incident last night." "You mean when your client broke into my garage and tried to steal my generator?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Bradshaw has explained the situation to me. She acknowledges that perhaps her approach was heavy-handed, but she was acting in what she believed were the best interests of the community during an emergency situation." Heavy-handed. She committed burglary. "Mr. Fordham, I'm calling to see if we can resolve this matter without involving the criminal justice system any further. The HOA is prepared to offer a full apology, payment for the damaged lock, and immunity from HOA fines for the next 6 months. Not interested." May I ask why not? This seems like a generous offer given the circumstances. Because your client committed a serious crime and needs to face consequences. If I let this slide, what's to stop her from breaking into someone else's property the next time she decides the HOA needs something? Linda Chen's voice cooled noticeably. I see. Well, I feel obligated to inform you that the HOA board held an emergency meeting this morning. They voted to fine you $12,000 for various violations of community covenants that have been accumulating over the past 3 years. There it was. Exactly what I'd expected. What violations? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics over the phone. You'll receive formal notice by certified mail within 3 business days. I'm calling as a courtesy to let you know it's coming, and to offer you one last chance to resolve the generator situation amicably. Drop the charges against Mrs. Bradshaw, and these fines will disappear. That's extortion. That's the HOA exercising its legal authority to enforce community standards. We'll see about that. Don't bother with the certified mail. Have your client and her board members properly served because they are about to get sued for harassment, abuse of power, and retaliation. And tell Mrs. Bradshaw that I'll see her in criminal court. I hung up before she could respond. Then I called an attorney friend from my FBI days, Marcus Rivera, who'd retired from the bureau a year before me and now practiced civil litigation in Austin. Patrick, how's retirement treating you? I need to sue my HOA. Say no more. I love these cases. What did they do? I spent 20 minutes catching him up. He actually laughed when I got to the part about Wendy trying to drag the generator out of my garage. Okay, so criminally, she's looking at burglary charges. That's the county's problem. Civil side, we can go after her personally and the HOA corporately for a bunch of stuff. Trespass, conversion, intentional infliction of emotional distress if you're feeling creative. But the real meat is the selective enforcement and retaliation. They're trying to fine me $12,000 for violations they claim I've racked up over 3 years. Have you? Some, sure. But nothing that justifies 12 grand. And they're clearly doing this because I pressed charges against their president. That's textbook retaliation, which violates Texas property code. You have documentation. Please tell me you have documentation. Marcus, I spent 28 years building federal cases. I have photos, videos, timestamps, correspondence, the complete HOA violation history for every house in the neighborhood to prove selective enforcement. Audio recordings of every conversation I've had with board members, and a spreadsheet tracking which homes get cited versus which ones don't. You beautiful, paranoid bastard. I love it. Email me everything. I'll have a complaint drafted by Monday. We're going to destroy this HOA. I don't want to destroy it. I just want them to follow their own rules and leave me alone. Trust me, when we're done, they'll be begging to leave you alone. We talked strategy for a while longer, then I spent the afternoon organizing my files and sending everything to Marcus. The power was still out across most of the neighborhood, and my generator was keeping my house comfortable while I worked. Around 4 p.m., my doorbell rang again. This time, it was my next-door neighbor, Tom Fletcher. Tom was mid-40s, worked in tech, had 2 kids and a wife who was always friendly when we ran into each other at the mailbox. Hey Patrick, got a minute? Sure, come in. He stepped inside, looking nervous. Look, I heard about what happened with Wendy and your generator. Actually, everyone's heard about it. It's all over the neighborhood Facebook group. I'm not on Facebook. Lucky you. Anyway, there's a lot of talk about you being selfish for not sharing your generator, and Wendy's spinning this whole narrative about you attacking her when she was just trying to help people. She broke into my garage at 3 in the morning to steal my property. I know, man. I'm on your side. But I wanted to give you a heads up that the board is planning something. My wife is friends with Susan Mitchell's daughter, and apparently they're organizing a neighborhood meeting to discuss your behavior. My behavior. They're going to try to paint you as a troublemaker who doesn't care about the community. They want to turn everyone against you so that, when the legal stuff happens, you don't have any support. I thanked Tom for the warning, and he left looking relieved that I wasn't angry at him for being the messenger. After he was gone, I pulled up the Oak Valley Estates Facebook group on my laptop. I wasn't a member, but it was a public group, so anyone could see the posts. Sure enough, there was a long thread about me. Wendy had posted her version of events, claiming she'd politely asked to borrow my generator and I'd threatened her with a gun, refused to help the elderly, and called the police to have her arrested for being on HOA business. The comments were brutal. Typical entitled jerk who doesn't care about anyone but himself. We should all remember who refused to help when people needed it most. The HOA should kick him out of the neighborhood. We don't need people like that here. There were a few people defending me, pointing out that Wendy had no right to take someone's property regardless of the circumstances, but they were getting shouted down. Someone named Margaret Winston wrote, "I'm 83 years old and I was freezing in my house last night." Patrick Fordham could have prevented that, but he chose to be selfish. Shame on him. I felt bad about Margaret Winston, genuinely bad, but the idea that I was personally responsible for keeping every elderly person in the neighborhood warm during a natural disaster was absurd. I grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency line for Williamson County. I'd like to request a welfare check on a resident at Oak Valley Estates. Her name is Margaret Winston, and I'm concerned she may not have adequate heat during the power outage. They took down the information and said they'd send someone to check on her. Then, I called the Round Rock Fire Department and asked about their warming center operations. They had 3 centers running with transportation available for people who couldn't drive. I got the details and posted them in the Facebook group from my laptop, not using my account but just as a guest comment. Within 5 minutes, someone had responded. "Oh look, Patrick finally decided to pretend he cares. Too little, too late." I closed the laptop. There was no winning this fight in the court of public opinion, at least not right now. But I didn't need to win in Facebook comments. I needed to win in actual court, and that was a game I knew how to play. That evening, Deputy Carson called me back. "Mr. Fordham, I spoke with Mrs. Bradshaw this afternoon. She's denying that she broke into your garage, claims the side door was unlocked and she walked in to ask you about borrowing the generator. That's a lie. I have video of her using bolt cutters on the padlock. I know." I explained that to her, and she changed her story to say the lock was already cut when she got there. She thinks maybe someone else broke in first. That's ridiculous. I agree. The problem is, her attorney is now involved and they're fighting the charges. The DA's office will review everything and decide whether to proceed, but I wanted you to know this probably won't be quick or easy. I understand. I spent long enough in law enforcement to know how this works. Right. Well, hang in there. The evidence is solid, and I don't see how she talks her way out of this. After we hung up, I sat in my living room and listened to the generator humming outside. The ice storm was supposed to last another 2 days at least. The power company was estimating a week before everyone had electricity again. It was going to get worse before it got better. Sure enough, the next morning brought a new wave of problems. I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "Selfish Jerk" across my garage door in bright red paint. My security cameras had caught the whole thing. Two teenagers, around 16 or 17, approaching around 2 a.m. with spray paint cans. They'd been careful to cover their faces, but I recognized one of them from the neighborhood. Ryan somebody lived 4 houses down. I filed another police report and saved the footage. Then, I spent $300 on graffiti remover and 2 hours cleaning my garage door in 15-degree weather while my neighbors drove past, some waving sympathetically, others glaring at me like I deserved it. Around noon, a truck from Bluebonnet Towing showed up and parked in front of my house. The driver, a guy in his 20s with a clipboard, knocked on my door. "Patrick Fordham, that's me. I'm here to tow your vehicle." It's been parked in the driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours, which violates HOA regulations. I looked past him at my truck, which was indeed parked in my driveway, where it had been parked for exactly 3 days because the ice made my garage floor too slippery to safely pull in and out. "You're kidding." "No, sir. I have authorization from the HOA to tow any vehicles in violation of parking restrictions." "Who called you?" "Wendy Bradshaw, HOA president." "Look, I'm just doing my job. If you want to fight it, take it up with the HOA, but I've got to tow the truck." "How much is the tow fee?" $250 to tow plus $75 per day storage. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus Rivera. He answered on the second ring. "Let me guess, more HOA problems. They're trying to tow my truck from my own driveway." "Don't let them. That's conversion, possibly theft." "Put the tow driver on the phone." I handed my phone to the confused driver, who listened for about 30 seconds before his expression changed. "Yes, sir. Understood. I'll let my dispatch know." He handed me the phone back and headed to his truck, making a call on his radio. "What did you tell him?" I asked Marcus. "That if he touches your truck, he's participating in an illegal seizure of property and will be named in the lawsuit we're filing. Most tow companies don't want that kind of liability. He'll go back to his office and they'll refuse the HOA's contract." "Thanks, Marcus." "No problem. Hey, I've got good news. I finished reviewing all your documentation. The case against the HOA is even stronger than I thought. They've been selectively enforcing rules for years, targeting specific homeowners while ignoring identical violations by others, and the fine structure they're trying to impose on you isn't even authorized by their own bylaws." "What do you mean?" "The bylaws say fines cap at $50 per violation, with a maximum of 3 violations per month. So the most they can legally fine you is $150 per month. They're trying to hit you with $12,000, which would require them to cite you for 80 violations over 16 months. I went through their notices. They only have documented evidence of maybe 15 actual violations over 3 years. So they're just making stuff up." "Exactly. And that opens them up to fraud charges, not just civil liability. I'm talking to a friend at the Texas Attorney General's office this afternoon. They have a division that handles HOA complaints, and when there's evidence of systemic fraud or abuse, they can step in and impose state supervision." This was getting bigger than I'd anticipated, but I couldn't say I was sorry. Wendy and her board had pushed this fight, and now they were going to learn that actions have consequences. That afternoon, the neighborhood meeting that Tom had warned me about took place at someone's house, since the clubhouse still had no power. I wasn't invited, but Tom recorded the whole thing on his phone and texted me the video later. Wendy stood in front of about 40 people, playing the victim perfectly. "I can't believe that after everything I've done for this community, Patrick Fordham had me arrested just for trying to help people. I've given 6 years of my life to this HOA, volunteered countless hours, and this is the thanks I get. A criminal record because I tried to keep people from freezing to death. Susan Mitchell backed her up. Patrick has shown a complete disregard for community values. He's suing the HOA for doing our jobs, he's threatened volunteers, and he's made it clear that he doesn't care about anyone but himself. The crowd murmured agreement. Someone shouted, "We should force him to sell his house and move." Gregory Hutchins, the vice president, held up his hands. "Now, we can't force anyone to sell, but we can make it clear that his behavior is unacceptable. The board has voted to pursue the maximum allowable fines for every violation we can document. If Mr. Fordham wants to live in our community, he needs to follow our rules like everyone else." Tom Fletcher, bless him, stood up. "With all due respect, Wendy broke into Patrick's garage and tried to steal his property. The fact that she claims she was doing it for good reasons doesn't make it okay. If my wife broke into someone's house to steal their food because she wanted to donate it to the food bank, she'd be arrested too, and rightfully so." "That's completely different," Wendy snapped. "I wasn't stealing. I was requisitioning community resources under emergency powers." "What emergency powers?" Tom pulled out his phone. "I've got the bylaws right here. There's nothing that gives the board authority to enter private property or take personal belongings." Wendy's face flushed. "The HOA attorney has reviewed the bylaws and confirmed we acted within our authority." "Then the HOA attorney is wrong and you're all going to get sued. Which, by the way, you are. Patrick's lawyer already filed a lawsuit this morning. I checked the county records." That caused an uproar. People started talking over each other, demanding to know why they hadn't been informed, asking if the HOA was going to have to pay for Wendy's legal defense, worrying about special assessments to cover legal fees. Wendy tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. The lawsuit is frivolous. Our attorney says it will be dismissed. We're not going to let Patrick Fordham bully this community just because he used to work for the FBI." "Maybe he's not bullying anyone," a woman I didn't recognize spoke up. "Maybe he's defending himself against an HOA board that's drunk on power. I've gotten fined 3 times this year for things my neighbors do all the time without any consequences. Maybe it's time we all stood up to this nonsense." The meeting devolved into arguments after that, and Tom ended the video. He texted me, "I think you might have more support than Wendy wants to admit. A lot of people are sick of her dictatorship." I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't counting on neighborhood support. This fight was going to be won in court, with evidence and legal arguments, not popularity contests. The next day brought a thaw. Temperatures climbed into the 40s, and the ice started melting. Power began coming back on in sections, and by evening my street had electricity again. I shut down the generator, stored it properly in my garage, and took stock of where things stood. Criminal charges pending against Wendy Bradshaw for burglary. Civil lawsuit filed against the HOA and its board members personally for harassment, selective enforcement, and retaliation. A neighborhood divided between people who thought I was a selfish jerk and people who thought the HOA had overstepped its authority. And an HOA board that showed no signs of backing down. The certified letter arrived 5 days later. It was 8 pages long and listed 63 supposed violations dating back 3 years. Grass too long on 14 occasions. Improper trash can placement 32 times. Unapproved exterior decorations 11 times. Vehicle parked in driveway overnight 6 times. The total fines came to $12,450. I scanned the entire document and emailed it to Marcus, then sat down to methodically refute every single claim. The grass violations. I had photos from those dates showing my lawn was well within the acceptable height range. The trash can violations. The bylaws said cans must be brought in within 24 hours of collection. I'd never left mine out longer than 6 hours. The decoration violations. I had photos showing identical decorations on other houses that never received citations. It took me 2 days to compile the evidence package, but when I was done, I had a 100-page document that systematically destroyed every claim the HOA had made. Marcus called it the most beautiful defense file I've ever seen. The criminal case against Wendy moved forward slowly. Her attorney filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the video evidence was inadmissible because I hadn't posted signs notifying people of security cameras. The judge denied the motion, citing Texas law that allows home security recording without notification on private property. Then Wendy's lawyer tried another angle, arguing that because Wendy had a good faith belief that the HOA bylaws gave her authority to take the generator, she lacked criminal intent. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Deanna Foster, destroyed that argument by pointing out that ignorance of the law isn't a defense. And besides, Wendy had no legal authority under the bylaws regardless of what she believed. The case was set for trial, and Wendy rejected a plea deal that would have given her probation and community service. She was convinced she'd be acquitted because she was acting for the good of the community. Meanwhile, the civil case was heating up. Marcus filed for expedited discovery, and we started deposing board members. Susan Mitchell cracked first. Under oath, she admitted that the decision to fine me $12,000 came immediately after I pressed charges against Wendy, and that she'd objected to the fines as being excessive and retaliatory, but had been outvoted. Gregory Hutchins tried to stonewall, claiming he couldn't remember specific details about why I'd been targeted with so many violations. Then Marcus showed him photos of his own house with identical violations that had never been cited, and Gregory got quiet. The HOA attorney, Linda Chen, tried to get the case dismissed on procedural grounds, but the judge let it proceed. We were headed for trial on both the criminal and civil matters. Then something unexpected happened. The Texas Attorney General's office announced they were opening an investigation into Oak Valley Estates HOA for potential violations of the Texas Property Code. Marcus's friend had come through. The AG's office sent investigators who spent 2 weeks interviewing homeowners and reviewing HOA records. What they found was damning. The HOA had been systematically targeting certain homeowners with excessive fines while ignoring violations by board members and their friends. The fine structure being used exceeded what the bylaws authorized. And there was evidence of financial mismanagement, with HOA funds being spent on unapproved expenses, including a $20,000 landscaping project at Wendy's house that was billed as clubhouse grounds maintenance, despite being nowhere near the clubhouse. The AG's office filed a cease and desist order against the HOA board, suspended their authority to issue fines, and appointed a temporary independent manager to oversee HOA operations pending a full audit. Wendy lost her mind. She started calling homeowners, trying to organize resistance against the state's intervention, claiming this was all my fault and that I'd destroyed the neighborhood. Most people ignored her, but a few die-hard supporters started a petition to have me removed from the neighborhood, which went nowhere because that's not how property ownership works. The criminal trial came first. It lasted 2 days. The prosecutor presented my security footage, which clearly showed Wendy using bolt cutters to break through my padlock, entering my garage without permission, and attempting to disconnect and remove my generator. The audio captured her admitting she was taking it. Wendy's defense attorney argued that the emergency situation created a necessity defense, that she was preventing greater harm by taking the generator to help vulnerable community members. The prosecutor countered with evidence that multiple warming centers were available, that emergency services were responding to welfare checks, and that Wendy had made no attempt to seek legal means of helping before resorting to breaking and entering. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and came back with a guilty verdict on burglary of a habitation. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. When the sentencing day came, I was there in the courtroom. Wendy's attorney gave an impassioned speech about her 6 years of community service, her spotless record before this incident, and her good intentions. He asked for probation. The prosecutor argued that Wendy had shown no remorse, had tried to cover up her crime with lies, and had attempted to use her HOA position to retaliate against the victim. She asked for jail time. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Barbara Chen, reviewed the file for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Bradshaw, I've read the pre-sentencing report and reviewed all the materials in this case. What concerns me most is not the original crime, although that was serious enough. What concerns me is your complete lack of acknowledgement that you did anything wrong. You seem to genuinely believe that your position as HOA president gave you the right to break into someone's home and steal their property. That level of entitlement is deeply troubling." Wendy tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand. "I'm sentencing you to 2 years in state prison, suspended with 5 years of probation. The conditions of probation include 1,000 hours of community service, not with your HOA, a $5,000 fine, restitution to Mr. Fordham for all damages and expenses related to this incident, and a prohibition on serving in any HOA leadership position during the probation period. If you violate probation in any way, you'll serve the full 2 years. You understand?" Wendy nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her husband, who I hadn't seen much during this whole ordeal, put his arm around her shoulders as they left the courtroom. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. Wendy had brought this on herself, but watching someone's life fall apart was never pleasant, even when they deserved it. The civil case settled 2 months later. The HOA's insurance company, after reviewing the evidence and the AG's investigation findings, agreed to pay me $75,000 in damages and legal fees. All fines against me were voided. The HOA board was required to adopt new bylaws with oversight provisions and term limits, and board members were required to undergo training on Texas property law. Wendy, Susan, and Gregory all resigned from the board. New elections were held, and Tom Fletcher got elected president on a platform of transparency and fair enforcement. His first act was to create a violation review committee where homeowners could appeal fines and present evidence of selective enforcement. The AG's investigation continued and eventually resulted in criminal charges against Wendy for theft and fraud related to the landscaping project at her house. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial, and her probation was extended. She and her husband sold their house and moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. Things slowly returned to normal in Oak Valley Estates. The Facebook group became less toxic as Wendy's supporters either moved on or realized that maybe unlimited HOA power wasn't such a great idea. I got to know more of my neighbors, and a lot of them apologized for believing Wendy's version of events. Margaret Winston, the 83-year-old who'd called me selfish, actually came to my house to apologize in person. "I'm sorry, dear. Wendy told us you'd threatened her and refused to help anyone. I didn't know the truth until the trial. "It's okay, Mrs. Winston. How are you doing?" "Much better. My son came and stayed with me during the ice storm, and we had a nice visit. I should have called him first instead of expecting the neighborhood to solve all my problems. We had coffee, and she told me stories about her late husband who'd been a detective with the Austin Police Department. We became friends after that, and I checked on her regularly. The insurance settlement money went into my retirement fund. Along with the $20,000 malicious prosecution settlement I got when Wendy's homeowner's insurance paid out for the spray painting incident. Turned out one of the teenagers she'd convinced to vandalize my garage had told his parents, who told me, and we'd added that to the civil case. A year after the ice storm, Oak Valley Estates was a different place. The new board actually followed the bylaws. Violations were enforced fairly across all homeowners, and the neighborhood felt more like a community and less like a dictatorship. Tom Fletcher stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back patio, watching the sunset and talking about how crazy the previous year had been. "You know, Patrick, when you first moved in, I thought you were kind of standoffish. Always polite but never really engaged with the neighborhood. I get it now, though. You were just being smart. You saw the HOA situation for what it was and kept your distance. I've dealt with a lot of corrupt organizations in my career. The signs were all there. Unilateral decision-making, lack of transparency, retaliation against anyone who questioned authority. It was inevitable that something would blow up eventually. Well, I'm glad it did. This neighborhood is better now, even if it took a lot of pain to get here. And hey, at least you got a good story out of it." I laughed. "Yeah, my retirement turned out to be more exciting than I'd planned." Any regrets? I thought about that. Wendy had lost almost everything. Her reputation, her freedom, her house. Other board members had faced consequences too. A lot of people had been hurt by the whole mess. But if I hadn't stood up to them, they would have kept abusing their power, hurting other people, acting like petty tyrants in a neighborhood that deserved better. No regrets. Sometimes you have to fight back against bullies, even when it would be easier to give in. That's what I learned in the FBI, and it's still true now. Tom raised his beer. To fighting back against bullies. We clinked bottles and drank to that. The generator that had started it all sat in my garage, properly maintained and ready for the next emergency. I'd upgraded my security system, reinforced my locks, and made sure every inch of my property was documented and monitored. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd learned that being prepared beats being sorry every single time. Sometimes at night, I'd hear the neighborhood quiet around me and think about how close things had come to going very differently. If I hadn't had security cameras, Wendy might have gotten away with her story that I'd threatened her. If I hadn't documented every HOA violation and interaction, I wouldn't have been able to prove the selective enforcement. If I hadn't known the law and had contacts in the legal system, I might have been buried under fraudulent fines and forced to settle. But I had all those things and I'd used them effectively, and justice had been served. Not perfectly, nothing ever is, but well enough. The neighborhood was better, the HOA was accountable, and people thought twice before abusing whatever small amount of power they had. My phone rang one evening about 18 months after the ice storm. Unknown number, but I answered it. "Mr. Fordham, this is Jennifer Martinez. I live in Cedar Creek Estates in Georgetown. I heard about what happened with your HOA, and I'm having similar problems with mine. They're trying to fine me $8,000 for violations I didn't commit, and I think it's because I reported the board president for embezzlement. I was wondering if you could give me some advice or maybe a referral to your attorney." I talked with Jennifer for an hour, giving her the guidance she needed and connecting her with Marcus Rivera. Over the next 6 months, I got 3 more calls like that. Word had apparently spread through the Austin area about the HOA president who'd picked the wrong homeowner to mess with, and people who were fighting their own HOA battles reached out for help. I started doing consulting work, helping homeowners document their cases, understand the law, and fight back against abusive HOAs. It wasn't something I'd planned, but it turned out there was a real need for someone who understood both the legal system and investigative techniques to help regular people stand up to organizations that had forgotten they were supposed to serve the community, not rule it. Marcus and I eventually formalized a partnership. He handled the legal side, and I did the investigation and evidence gathering. We took on about a dozen cases that first year and won most of them. The ones we didn't win outright usually settled on favorable terms once the HOAs realized we had the documentation to prove abuse. The work was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. During my FBI career, I'd taken down terrorists, mobsters, and corrupt politicians. Important work, necessary work, but always operating at a scale that felt distant from regular people's lives. This was different. I was helping individuals and families protect their homes, their investments, and their peace of mind from petty tyrants who'd forgotten that power comes with responsibility. 3 years after the ice storm, I was sitting in my home office reviewing evidence for a case in San Antonio when my doorbell rang. I pulled up the camera feed and saw a woman in her 30s standing on my porch, looking nervous. I answered the door. "Can I help you, Mr. Fordham?" "I'm Rachel Bradshaw, Wendy's daughter. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in my living room and Rachel twisted her hands nervously before speaking. "I wanted to apologize for what my mother did. Not just breaking into your garage, but everything that came after. The lies, the retaliation, turning the neighborhood against you. I was away at graduate school when most of it happened, but I've heard all about it since. I'm mortified. You're not responsible for your mother's actions. I know, but I also know I raised her to believe she could do whatever she wanted if she had good intentions. My father and I both enabled her worst impulses. When she became HOA president, it went to her head, and we didn't push back when we should have." "How is she doing?" Rachel sighed. "Not great. The probation, the criminal record, having to move, losing all her friends in the neighborhood. It's been hard on her. She still doesn't really accept that she did anything wrong, which is part of the problem. But she's getting therapy now, which is something at least. I'm glad she's getting help. I also wanted to tell you that you were right to press charges and sue. I didn't think so at first. I thought you were being vindictive. But then I learned more about what the HOA board had been doing, the selective enforcement, the financial mismanagement, the retaliation against anyone who questioned them. My mother had become exactly the kind of person who needs to be stopped. So, thank you. You probably saved other people from going through what you went through." We talked for another half hour. Rachel was a psychologist, specializing in organizational behavior, and she had some interesting perspectives on how small amounts of power could corrupt people who weren't equipped to handle it responsibly. She was writing a paper on HOA governance and accountability, using her mother's case as an example of what went wrong. After Rachel left, I sat on my patio and thought about accountability and consequences, and how hard it is to admit when you're wrong. Wendy had never gotten there, might never get there, but at least her daughter understood. That was something. The neighborhood had continued to thrive under Tom's leadership. Property values were up. Community events were well attended. And the Facebook group was mostly people sharing recommendations for contractors and organizing yard sales instead of tearing each other apart over HOA drama. I'd become more involved in the community too. I organized a neighborhood watch program that actually focused on safety instead of being a cover for nosiness and power trips. I helped elderly residents with home maintenance projects. I coached a youth baseball team one summer. The house that I'd bought thinking it would be a quiet place to fade into retirement had become a real home, part of a real community. 4 years after the ice storm, another major winter weather event hit Texas. Not as bad as the previous one, but still serious enough that power went out for a few days. This time, when I fired up my generator, 3 neighbors came by asking if they could run extension cords to keep their refrigerators going. I said yes, of course, and we worked out a rotation so everyone could keep their essential appliances running. Tom Fletcher coordinated the neighborhood response through a group text, making sure elderly and vulnerable residents were checked on, that people knew where the warming centers were, and that anyone who needed help got it. No breaking into garages, no stealing generators, no abuse of authority. Just neighbors helping neighbors, the way it should have been all along. When the power came back on, we had a neighborhood cookout to celebrate. About 60 people showed up, including Margaret Winston, who brought her famous chocolate chip cookies. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. Kids ran around playing, and people talked about how glad they were to be part of such a great community. Standing there with a plate of food, watching my neighbors laugh and enjoy themselves, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. It had started with a middle-aged woman in a pink parka breaking into my garage because she thought being HOA president put her above the law. It had gone through criminal trials, civil lawsuits, state investigations, and enough drama to fill a television series. It had cost people their reputations, their money, their freedom, and their homes. But it had ended here, with a neighborhood that understood accountability, followed its own rules, and actually worked together for the common good. The price had been high, but the outcome was worth it. Tom came over with a beer for me. You thinking deep thoughts, just reflecting on how much has changed. All because you refused to let Wendy steal your generator. It was never really about the generator, I know. It was about not letting bullies win. We clinked bottles, and I took a long drink of cold beer on a sunny afternoon in a neighborhood that had learned some hard lessons and come out better for it. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Another potential client, another HOA situation that needed investigation. I looked at the message, then looked at my neighbors enjoying their cookout, then back at the message. You need to take that, Tom asked. Later. Right now, I'm exactly where I need to be. The sun was setting over Oak Valley Estates, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and well-maintained homes. Somewhere in Texas, another HOA was probably overstepping its authority. Another petty tyrant was abusing whatever small power they'd been given. Another homeowner was wondering if they should fight back or just give in. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, I was going to eat a burger, drink a beer, and enjoy living in a neighborhood where the HOA remembered it existed to serve the community, not rule it. Where people helped each other without being coerced or threatened. Where you could own a generator and sleep soundly knowing nobody was going to break into your garage to steal it. It had taken a retired FBI agent, a winter storm, and one spectacularly bad decision by a HOA president to get here. But we'd made it, and the view from this side was pretty damn good. As darkness fell and the cookout wound down, I helped Tom clean up, said goodbye to neighbors, and walked back to my house. The generator sat in my garage, quiet now, just a piece of equipment waiting for the next emergency. but it represented something bigger to me. It represented the line between reasonable community standards and tyrannical overreach. It represented the importance of standing up for yourself, even when it's easier to give in. It represented the truth that laws and rules apply to everyone, regardless of their position or intentions. I locked up for the night, set my security system more out of habit than necessity now, and settled into my favorite chair with a book. The house was quiet, the neighborhood was peaceful, and my conscience was clear. In the end, that's all any of us can really ask for. To live in peace, to stand up for what's right when necessary, and to build communities where people treat each other with respect and fairness. It shouldn't have taken a criminal trial and a federal investigation to get there, but sometimes the hard way is the only way that works. The generator incident had taught Oak Valley Estates a lesson that would last for years to come. Power, even the small amount wielded by an HOA board, requires responsibility, accountability, and respect for the rights of others. Forget that, and eventually you'll pick the wrong fight with the wrong person, and everything will come crashing down. I was just glad I'd been the right person at the right time to make sure that crash happened before anyone else got hurt. And I was even more glad to be living in the neighborhood that had emerged from the wreckage, stronger and better than before.